Check, check, check. Hello. Check, check, check. Hello.
Is it already turned on? Okay, great. Okay. Now maybe it's over here. Well,
Check. Hello.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I'm not doing anything in the room here. This is just for the computer. But thank you for coming and spending some time with us today and braving the rain. Um, yeah, right.
blessed rain.
Everybody familiar with this man to my right? Mr. Poshard is gracious enough at this time today to be here. We're going to do some readings from his book. He's going to talk about some stories, and then if you guys have questions and want to talk with him afterward, that's great. This will be, if you want to come back and rewatch it later, it'll be on the library's YouTube channel. You can visit the library's website and find the link there. But I won't run my guns all day long. Mr. Glenn Poshard.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate the Marion Carnegie Library for hosting this reading for us. It means a lot to me. As a resident of Williamson County for many, many years. And just thank you folks for coming out on a rainy day to listen to some of the readings. And I'll share, the book is kind of full of stories, and so I'll share some of those stories with you about my life and my career. Unfortunately, the author, Carl Walworth, could not be with us today. Carl lives in Mattoon. He has been the editor and publisher of both the Mattoon newspaper and the Charleston newspaper, which were two of the largest newspapers in my congressional district when I served in Congress. So that's how I got to meet Carl. He's a wonderful gentleman. When he retired, he started writing books about people he had met. And he and I sat down at the Carterville Cafe one day and decided that he would be the author of this book. And so I think he's done a great job. It's sold extremely well on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and the SIU Press. So we're grateful for that. The picture on the front of the book tells it all. There's a little village of Harold over in southern White County near the hill country. And this picture is a picture of me standing in front of the old precinct that my dad would take me when I was a small boy with him every election. And we would stand there and listen to the judges count the ballots and argue whether the X was in the box or out of the box and all that sort of thing. But they took a photographer with me and we went over there, and the old building is still standing, as well as the outhouse behind it. So that's the picture on the front of the book. I lived in a section of White County, southern White County, known as the Hill Country, and that's where I grew up. And I thought I'd share a few things from my early upbringing, and then I'll get on to some other stories here pretty soon. Okay, let me pick out a story here. My mother was a farm lady as well as my dad, and my father only had one arm. He got his left arm shot off in a hunting accident when he was 13 years old. My mother and my dad both had third grade educations, and everybody around the hill country where I lived was very, very poor. But one of the things that we did was all of the food that we ate, we raised or slaughtered, or we get mom canned and made, everything to hold us through the winter. But the garden was a huge garden, and it was important to me. And so I wrote this poem about my mother, and I just called it The Garden. Leaves from the pin oak falling softly across the lawn. Full moon coming up slowly over the pond. Memories of you even now in my 70s. At this time of year, planting the garden would have been first on our agenda. Long rows of tomatoes and green beans and onions and potatoes. You in your sunbonnet and long dress, bending over the garden hoe. Me placing the potato slips in the mounds, bareheaded and shirtless in the sun, hands and knees in the mud. Day after day of hoeing and weeding and watering, waiting patiently for our spring ritual to begin. At 6 in the morning, we would walk in the garden, the sun coming up, and pick 2 red-ripened tomatoes, still cool from the morning dew. We'd sit on the edge of the porch, salt shakers in hand, enjoying the fruits of our garden, greeting the morning sun, talking about the Sunday school lesson in the Chapman's Grove General Baptist Church. A few Christmases ago at the family gathering, Madeline, Ed, and I asked the same question. What did we remember most about you? Rattling pans at 4:30 in the morning to get Dad off to work and herding us all off to church on Sunday was easy. But I was the only one who remembered the garden because it was just for me, your own special gift to me. Sitting here on the porch, listening to the chorus of crickets in the woods along the pond, I miss you, and the moon and the pillow. Miss you too. So that was my memory of my mother, that garden. Every year we put out that garden, Mom and I. And we took care of it, everything out of it, lasted through the summer and she canned and so on. And a lot of our food source. My dad, my father was of a generation that just simply did not express feelings. I was a pretty sensitive kid growing up, and I needed to hear my father tell me that he loved me, and he could not do that. Never could do that. But I think every kid wants to hear that from their parents, and so I wrote a poem about my dad, and I'll read this to you. Let me find it here. Most of the kids from the hill country where I grew up, as soon as they graduated high school, joined the Army or the Navy or the Air Force because no one had any money. Nobody had any money for college or anything like that, and there were no jobs. It's red clay, hill country. The nearest town was about 16 miles away, and that was Carmine, Illinois. So anyway, I joined the Army on my 17th birthday, and this poem is about my father and about the night I left for the Army. I just called it The Porch. Uncle Joe parked his 54 yellow Chevrolet truck on the gravel road leading past the barn lot and came through the gate. He asked you if you needed any help, and your reply was, "No, the boy here helps me. He's about the only help I've got." I was 13. 4 years later, I joined the Army on my 17th birthday. I had to catch the train to St. Louis at 4 o'clock in the morning. I had never been away from home. Mom cooked breakfast for me, mostly kept her face toward the stove, crying quietly. You sat on the front porch, completely in the dark, except for one small sliver of light from the kitchen falling across the far end of the porch. I hugged Mom goodbye and stepped out onto the porch. I held my hand out into the darkness and felt your one arm brush me shoulder high. It lingered for the briefest moment, like the beginning of a lover's touch. You told me to take care of myself. Years later, when I was in my early 30s and you were about to die, the ingrate in me asked you if you had ever loved me. I think I broke your heart. The barn lot and the porch ought to have been enough. Those were the two memories I had of my father, and the two times that he came closest to telling me that he loved me. He told Uncle Joe, "No, I don't need any help. The boy here helps me." I remembered that. And that night on the porch, he just reached his hand out, touched me on the shoulder, kept it there for just a second, and just said, "Take care of yourself." That's all he could do. I suspect that was true of a lot of his generation. They just didn't know how to deal with feelings and expressions like that. And I needed that as a young man. But I loved my father so much. He was a wonderful, wonderful, generous, giving person. Taught us many great things. I'll share with you this. I was sent to the 1st Cav Infantry Division up on the DMZ in Korea after I joined the Army. And in my spare time, right down the main supply route from my outfit, there was an orphanage. And that orphanage took care of children who had lost their parents during the war and had no place to live. And some of them were children of American soldiers and Korean women and were total outcasts in their society. It's called the Songjuk Orphanage. And so I'll read you this portion. Soon, however, there emerged an outlet that consumed most all of his free time. Down the main supply route, several miles from his base, was the Songjuk Orphanage, home to about 80 children, from small children to teens, Korean children who had been neglected and abandoned after the war. Korea was full of these children, outcast in their own society, with no families to care for them and no place to stay. Songjuk consisted of concrete blocks on concrete slabs. One woman ran the place. The children slept on straw mats in several rooms with no blankets. Their diet was primarily rice cooked in large pots. A large yard provided room to play, but there was no equipment. Poshard knew poverty, but this poverty gripped his heart. Seeing children treated as though they were invisible in their own country was something he couldn't accept. Poshard and his buddies began to collect $1 from each soldier in his company each payday, sometimes collecting as much as $150 a month. With the money, they purchased food, clothes, and related items. They assigned each child an arbitrary birthday, and each month they celebrated with a cake. They had churches from home send blankets, quilts, and clothes. The children loved to see the soldiers coming. Every weekend when we were off, sometimes through the week, we played with the kids. We went there every time we could get away. As the end of his tour of duty in Korea approached, the questions of purpose and meaning flooded into his conscience. The orphanage impacted him on two levels. I had started questioning my sister Jolene's death. I was raised in a church with black and white thinking. I started questioning my faith in God. I had never done that before. I thought, how can a just God, how can he allow these children to be in this situation? How can this country be destroyed and families torn apart between the North and the South? This began weighing on me mentally. Tough as his youth was, he always had clothes and food. The neglect was beyond his experience. Never as a child did he wait for the neighbor's leavings in the trash to have something to eat. as children did around the Army base. Looking back, I was struggling from my sister's death. I was not mature enough in my faith to understand these inconsistencies. I thought, I'll never see these kids again. I was praying for understanding. I remember the day I got on the plane to come home. I was just distraught. Years later, when he was president of Southern Illinois University, he regularly perused other university magazines in the hopes of picking up some best practices for his alma mater. He came across an article about Jenny Roby, a professor at Brigham Young University. Professor Roby was an internationally acclaimed authority on child abuse, neglect, and abandonment. As he read the story of her life, a single paragraph caught his attention. She had been an orphan in the Songjuk orphanage during the time he had served in Korea. He immediately picked up the phone and called her at Brigham Young University. Yes, I remember the soldiers, she told Poshard, adding, I'd like to do something to pay that back. Would you come spend a day at our university? He replied. In February 2014, she did, telling her story to Southern Illinois University students and faculty. She explained that she had been adopted by Mormon missionaries who had visited the orphanage and brought her to Utah, where she grew up and followed her dream to help abandoned children around the world. Poshard gave her copies of photos. Roby said these were the only pictures her friends in the orphanage would have of that period in their lives. For Poshard, it provided perspective. It took God 50 years to reveal to me the good that came out of that poverty and pain I witnessed in that orphanage. Now she is making a difference for hundreds of thousands of children all over the world. The life lesson to him is this. You have to look at your contributions in the world as things you may never find out about. You're lucky if you see a small part of what you did come to fruition in the lives of others. We should never demand payoff for what we see and do now. To mature in faith, we have to understand it's enough just to give the gift. That to me was a miracle. 50 years after I got on that plane to leave Korea with a hole in my heart, knowing I'd never see these kids again. I'm reading the magazine from Brigham Young University at my desk at SIU. And there it is. Here's this kid that had been in that orphanage when I was there. And she is now an international authority on child abuse, neglect, and abandonment, going all over the world where there are civil wars being fought in countries, third world nations, and so on, advising governments how to set up programs to take care of these children that are lost, whose parents are killed, made an incredible difference in the world. And she came to SIU and spent 2 days lecturing to our people. I never dreamed that would happen in my life. And here's another amazing thing. They have 4 children, she and her husband. One of them is a social worker in southern Indiana. And 2 weeks ago, she and her husband came to visit her daughter and stopped and visited with Joe and I for a couple hours. We had lunch together on their way through. So, it's I don't know, to me, that's a powerful, powerful story of her making such a difference in the world. Okay, I will read you another story. Okay. Before I went into politics, I worked for the Illinois State Board of Education, and I was chosen to represent thousands of teachers and students around the state in the gifted education program. I was the director of gifted education for the southern 36 counties of southern Illinois. And anyway, I'll read this story to you. Let me see if I can find it here. Okay. I had gone up to testify before a Senate committee to try to get more money for these children. And so I'll start the story from here after I had been elected to the Illinois State Senate. As President Rock introduced him to other senators, Poshard was awkwardly reminded of an experience in which he testified before a Senate committee. During his tenure with the Gifted Education Service Center, he sometimes presented to legislative committees. On one occasion, Poshard got home late the night before his testimony, changed into shorts, and drove into Springfield about midnight with Joe so he would be ready to testify early the next day. When I took the white dress shirt off the hanger, I discovered to my amazement there were no dress pants underneath, only a pair of women's brownish yellow hip hugger bell-bottom pants that Joe had purchased 10 years earlier at a garage sale. The pants had an additional feature. There were 6 gold buttons, each the size of a nickel, which stretched from the navel all the way down the crotch in place of a zipper. There were no overnight stores in Springfield in the 1970s. These pants were all I had, and I couldn't skip the hearing. I was representing thousands of teachers, parents, and students all over the state. So I dressed quickly, wearing the form-fitting women's tight hippie pants, rushed down to the Capitol while it was still deserted at 7 in the morning, found the hearing room, placed the 25 copies of my testimony on the witness desk with a page to pass out to each member of the committee, and sat down with my legs completely hidden under the desk. Since I knew I was first on the agenda to testify, I sat there as the room filled up behind me and the senators filed into their seats in front of me. At least this way, I would only suffer the embarrassment I would feel walking out of the room after my testimony. The chairman finally was seated at his desk and began the hearing. He quickly pronounced that the committee was without a page today, and would Mr. Poshard please pass out a copy of his testimony to each member. Oh my God, I can still feel the panic. I can still feel the panic. Absolute panic. As I moved out into the open and through the committee, every eye in the room fell on those bell-bottom pants with the gold buttons down the front. I made it back to the witness table, gave my testimony, took a few quick questions, and quickly exited the room for the long, silent ride home with Joe. When introduced by Rock 8 years later, Vince DiMuzio remembered. "Yeah, I know you," said DiMuzio, replied Poshard. "Senator, I don't believe we've personally met." DiMuzio reminded Poshard of his committee testimony years before. With a smile, he said, "Your outfit for the day convinced me to vote for the bill." Poshard laughed and said, "Those darn hip hugger bell-bottom pants with the gold buttons down the front." Andrea, I could not have had, I never dressed that badly in the 15 years you worked with me, did I, Judy? I was so embarrassed, but there was nothing I could do. It was just absolute, oh my gosh. Okay, I'll share another one with you. Let's see. Both Governor Thompson and President Rock solicited Poshard's vote for the Build Illinois plan. I didn't hesitate for 1 second before I promised my vote, said Poshard. My district needed a lot of help, and I ran for the Senate to deliver for my district. If people wanted to vote me out for the tax increase I supported, then so be it. Build Illinois was a coordinated statewide effort that generated headlines across the state. A couple months after the election, Poshard encountered a request that typified life of a lawmaker, an isolated request that highlighted a local need but was not tied to a broad legislative package. He was invited to the Senior Center in Golconda, a scenic community along the Ohio River with fewer than 1,000 residents. Their old bus was in terrible condition, and it wasn't going to make it through the hills much longer to pick up the seniors for lunch and activities. Poshard joined the seniors for lunch, then rode the rickety bus as it took people home. He was about to get honest feedback. We barely made it up the big hill in Golconda, the bus shaking and jerking violently. I thought it was going to fall apart. I was sitting about 3 rows back, and an elderly gentleman was seated directly across the aisle from me. As we drove through the hills, he proceeded to tell me that he'd just had his 82nd birthday, and he sure hoped I could get them a new bus. I noticed the driver glancing back through her rearview mirror and listening to our conversation. Eventually, she said to the little white-haired lady sitting in the first row right behind her, "You just had a birthday too. Tell Senator Poshard how old you are and what you'll do for him in the next election if he'll help us get a new bus." It seemed like the longest time, but eventually the little white head turned to face me. In a most sincere fashion, she said, "Mr. Poshard, you can see this old bus is falling apart, and I hope you can help us get a new one. I enjoy the Senior Citizen Center and visiting with my friends, and this is the only way I can get there. But I just turned 85, and I've never voted for a Democrat in my life, and I'm not voting for you either." She was just being honest. You know, they say if you want to get an honest response from a child or an elderly person, that's who you ask, because they'll give you the honest response. But she just leveled me right there in the bus. And I kind of loved her for it, because most folks will tell you what they think you want to hear, you know, but not her. She'd lived too long. She wasn't having any of that. But you know what? She got a bus. Didn't she, Judy? She did. So, but that was funny. But that was honest feedback. Okay. Let me share this with you. Okay. Where am I looking here? 144, 146. Oh, I should have shared that. Okay. Let me share this. 146. Okay. Late in 1995, Poshard was asked to join a 15-member congressional delegation proposed by President Clinton to ascertain what a role America should play in the horrific civil war in Bosnia. The ensuing story is one he has told over the years. The delegation met December 1 through 4, 1995, with diplomatic and military leaders, including the presidents of Bosnia, Croatia, and Serbia. The group flew 17 hours from Washington to Belgrade to begin their mission. Poshard described how the group first met with Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic, whose army had systematically murdered tens of thousands of civilians because they were a different religion, a different ethnicity, or a different race. We sat in his government palace, surrounded by his armed guards, and to a person, all of us looked him in the eye and offered the same advice. Stop the ethnic cleansing in Bosnia and Croatia, or America will come after you. I was very proud of our bipartisan delegation, because we did, in that moment, what America is supposed to do when people are threatened with no just cause by bullies and dictators. President Reagan referred to America as the shining city on a hill. This is not only who we are to the oppressed people of the world, but who we must continue to be. When we cozy up to bullies, the rest of the world loses faith in us and loses hope for their own freedom. There is no compromise with the evil practices of the Milosevic, the Putins, and the Kim Jong-uns of the world. There is no gain great enough in our relationship with these kinds of dictators that is worth sacrificing the sacred position that America occupies in the international community. The second stop was in Zagreb, Croatia, to meet with leader Branko Tuđman. The dinner meeting with the president and his staff involved discussion about Croatia's possible alignment with Bosnia against the Milosevic government in Serbia and the extent of America's involvement in helping to bring peace to the region. After the breakup of Yugoslavia under Tito, Tuđman had been a leader in forming an independent government in Croatia and very much opposed to any Serbian interference in his country. The third stop took the delegation to Sarajevo to meet Bosnian leader Alija Izetbegović. We flew in on an armored C-130, Poshard recalls, describing how he took the opportunity to ride in the jump seat behind the two young pilots and observe their defensive maneuvers to stay out of the range of gunfire on the plane's descent into the Sarajevo airport. When we landed on the only runway still open, a gigantic earth-moving caterpillar pulled up to the plane, and we walked behind its blade to our security detail on the edge of the airport. We were still wearing our flak jackets as we boarded the bus that would take us through the city. The Muslim security detail then took our delegation through what once was one of the most beautiful cities in the world, now with few standing buildings. We noticed people running out from burned-out basements and overturned rail cars, people clapping. They knew some American congresspersons were in their city, and we were going to have something to say about their future. We kept imploring the guards to let us stop and talk to the people. Their reply was, "The people won't talk to you. They're too scared." At some point, the guards gave in, and the bus pulled into a square where the beautiful city library had recently burned to the ground. Hundreds were coming from side streets and alleys into the square as we got off the bus. In the crush of that crowd, I'll never forget it as long as I live. This one elderly gentleman with only a couple of teeth left in his head grabbed me by the arm. He told me his last remaining brother had been killed in the square a month ago. My wife is gone. My children are gone. He grabbed me by the arm and said, "Do you not understand, Mr. Congressman? We only trust America. We only trust America." We went on and met with President Izetbegović and his staff. We could hear mortar shells fired from the surrounding mountainside going off in the city while we talked. Finally, we retraced our route to the airport, staying behind as many of the standing buildings as we could. We had to leave during daylight since there were no lights left on the runway. We stopped in Naples, Italy, and spent part of the next day with the commanding general of NATO forces in that region, and then headed to Germany to meet with our troops who might be asked to intervene and stop the bloodshed. On the way to Germany, I finally understood the old man's words. He wasn't saying, "We only trust America's military or economic strength to save us." He was saying, "We trust the experience of America." He knew the story of our country, that people came from all over the world with different ethnic, religious, racial, and social backgrounds to form one America. And for nearly 250 years, they had chosen to live with each other despite all of their differences. Not perfectly, and we still have a long way to go, but he knew the story of America. And he believed that if America could make it despite our differences, then maybe his country could make it too. That was the message Poshard brought home and shared with the president in the White House debriefing. He told the president, the world relies on America, its diversity and its principles, to defeat our own worst impulses and those of autocratic leaders like Melissa. That was an important meeting. I traveled to 36 different countries around the world. And this country is just what President Reagan said. It is the shining light on the hill everywhere. If we lose that, if we decide to turn on each other because of our differences, because of a different race or religion or ethnicity group, social group or whatever, we will lose America. And so we can't do that. You know, if we do, we can't any longer be that shining light on the hill to every other nation who looks to us, you know, as the example of what can be. So anyway, my dad used to say, boy, you go all the way around the barn to say everything, so forgive me if I'm preaching, but I'm not trying to, you know. Okay, let me see another one here. Hold on one second. Gotta find this. Okay. I had a district in Congress that stretched all the way from about 25 miles north of Decatur to Carroll. It was huge. And you have to have very effective management to control a district that big in terms of getting things done for the people. To effectively and efficiently work with and help constituents, Poshard relied on staff led by Judy Hampton. I remember the first piece of advice I received after my appointment to the state senate in August 1984. It came from Senator Vince DiMuzio, who would become one of my closest friends over the next many years. He said, "Nothing you do up here will be as important as what you do back home to take care of your people. Hire the best person you can find to get that job done." I found Vince's words to be true, not only for the state senate, but for the U.S. Congress. The person I hired for that most important job was Judy Hampton. Judy had been the former assessor for Williamson County and was working as an assistant to Senator Gene Johns before his passing. She had excellent administrative skills, knew the Senate district well, and was completely trustworthy. Judy was district manager from my first day in the Senate until my last day in Congress. We hired staff who were competent, lived throughout the 39 counties I represented, and well-trained and excellent constituent service. The The staff worked hard to help every person who walked into our offices. Every piece of correspondence required a response within 3 days. There was only one ironclad rule. We never asked anyone their politics. Judy enforced that rule religiously. We were there to serve all the people, whether they voted for us or against us. Politics ended at the office door. I followed Senator Musio's advice from the Senate to Congress to SIU. You're only as good as your staff, and I will always feel I had the best. And Judy is with us here today. Judy, thank you for all the service that you gave us. Judy is an exceptional person, not just as a person, but she was there before anybody else got to the office, and she left after everybody else left. She was you were just a wonderful manager, Judy, and we put 15 and a half years in together, and that meant everything to me. I appreciate it. I want you to know that. I don't know what time it is or how long we can go or should go. We got a few more minutes. I'll share a couple more with you if I can find them here. This one is sort of heartbreaking to me, but I will share it with you. When I was growing up over in southeastern Illinois, every Sunday afternoon, teenagers would cross the river bridge at Shawneetown and drive over to Sturgis, Kentucky. Sturgis was about 10 or 11 miles on the other side of the Shawneetown Bridge, and it had an old abandoned airstrip. And the kids, the high school kids, would go over there and they would drag race their cars. That was a big deal on Sunday afternoon. So on this one particular Sunday afternoon, my sister and 4 of my best friends had gone over to Sturgis to watch the great kids drag race their cars. And on the way back, late in the afternoon, they were in a convertible car, and a young man who she was betrothed to, they were both high school seniors, they were sitting in the back seat, his hat blew off. He had a cowboy hat on. And the young man driving pulled into a side road to go back to get the hat, and backed out in front of a tractor trailer going 65 miles an hour and killed them all. Anyway, it devastated our family, devastated my mom and dad. We had grown up in a little Baptist evangelical church out there in the country, and it was black and white. Everything was black and white. There was a little ground on it. But the one big issue that the church enforced rigorously was no alcohol, no drink. Well, the accident scene that day was littered with beer cans all over the place. So they knew the kids had been drinking. And it devastated my mom and dad. They lost faith in the church. They lost faith in the community because of these hard and fast rules that these kids, 17, 18 years old, could not comply with. They were growing up. And anyway, I was still at home. Didn't want to finish my junior and senior year in high school, but knew that I had to. My brother and my sister made sure I did. But my sister was the closest person to me. We were only 2 left at home. My older brother and sister had already moved away and married. So anyway, I wrote this poem about my sister and I. We lived up in the hills 2.5 miles from our school, and every day we would walk those 2.5 miles through the hills to our school. No kindergarten back then, first grade through 8th grade. schoolhouse. I've always loved May. Walking home from the grade school we attended a couple miles away, we stopped to wade in Weasel Creek, flowing swiftly from the fresh spring rains. The wildflowers were thick along the gravel road to our house, their fragrance mingling with that of the sassafras roots and sweet smell of clover. On the last day of school, we were allowed to stop in the village general store and buy a treat to savor on our walk home. The store-bought candies were a poor second to the bluebells and the dogwoods and the field of clover. Every day on that walk, we shared poems. We both loved Edna St. Vincent Millay's God's World and would recite it to each other. On those fleeting days of laughter in May, we were kids, loving the woods and the flowers and the sweet fragrance of life that was all around us. 4 years later, on a sunny May afternoon, I lost you to the speeding semi. You were engaged to be married after your high school graduation the last week of May. Recently, I visited the old home place after being away many years. I walked the road again from our house to the old schoolhouse in the village. I'm sure you know the meadow just past the bridge over Weasel Creek sports its exuberant yellow plumage, and the bluebells are scattered liberally throughout the woods. Along the road, wisteria climbs some of the abandoned fence posts where the barbed wire used to be. I think of you often these days, and the pure novice love we shared with each other in those days of our youth. I have kept it in my heart. So I have to have a way to express feelings. That's how I do it most of my life, is write about it. I will take the time to share one more with you, maybe. If that's all right. After I lost the race for governor, and that's all in the book here, and so on. Joe and I got up the next morning and said, "Okay, what's the next step here? What are we going to do?" So we both decided, based upon the town meetings I'd had all over the state, and people would get up and say, "Well, if you become governor, what are you going to do about all these abused children? They're in every community." I wasn't aware that we were in that bad of shape. But so we decided, sitting there the next morning after the election was over, that what we wanted to do was help these children. And so we formed a foundation at John A. Logan College, and took on our first job. In Cairo, a town in which he had spent over 2 decades trying to help the community bridge social and economic gaps, the women's shelter was housed in a building that was borderline condemnable. Thus, the first project became building a new Cairo women's shelter. The unmarked shelter had been full since its opening in 2003. It rests on a corner lot next to a row of trees around the corner from the site of a now demolished housing project. Fenced-in backyard playground provides respite for children held in unserved hands. We purchased 2 lots next to the old building where Janine Woods and her staff were trying to take care of abused women and children from the southernmost counties of Illinois, the poorest part of the state, Poshard said. The building was a fire trap and needed to be replaced as soon as possible. Over the next year, our foundation raised money, purchased hundreds of thousands of dollars in materials, and with the leadership of Reverend John Annable, pastor of the United Methodist Church in Carbondale, and many SIU student volunteers, a new $650,000 shelter was built. Every Saturday morning at 8 a.m., 10 or 12 carloads of students would leave the SIU Student Center and caravan the 60 miles to Cairo and work a 10-hour day building that shelter. When people today tell me this generation of kids are self-centered, that they don't care about others, I tell them the story of the Caro shelter. All this generation needs is someone to give them directions, and they'll get the job done. They're great kids with a heart for helping others. Union electricians and plumbers wired and plumbed the entire building for us, volunteering their time and labor. Union laborers and painters built the sidewalks and painted the shelter. A local veterans group contributed an entire backyard of playground equipment and put it all together for the children. It was a great team effort, and the building was turned over to Mrs. Woods without one penny of debt. On the day the shelter was finished, Mrs. Woods and I were sitting in the kitchen at the kitchen table in the old shelter, which would soon be torn down. She received a phone call from the Massac Memorial Hospital in Metropolis, Illinois. A baby had just been born, and they needed the address of the new shelter. It would go on the baby's birth certificate. It broke my heart. A baby had come into the world, and a shelter would be its first home. But I knew in that moment that we had done a good thing. It was a new home, and Mrs. Woods and her staff would love the baby like it was their own. So we built other shelters throughout the area, and our foundation takes care, contributes to at least the care of 1,800 abandoned, neglected, and abused children a year. We've raised millions of dollars. John A. Logan gives us office space and computers, so we don't have any overhead. Every penny that's sent to our foundation goes directly to the support of the children. If someone calls us up among 30 social service agencies and tells us there's a problem with a child here that there are no funds for from the state, we've got a 4-person board. As soon as they email us or send us the forms that we require to prove that this is a real incident, whether it's a child getting their teeth knocked out, in a fight between mom and dad or whatever, we get on the phone and we read over the application immediately, our 4 people, and we approve the money, and it's sent directly to the agency to take care of that child's needs, whatever it is. We've wired courthouses so children that are abused don't have to go into the courtroom to face their perpetrator, which is equally as bad. They can sit in an adjoining room and never have to see their perpetrator, but testify to the judge and the court, preventing them from having a second kind of abuse. We send children to camps for this very purpose. We have contributed last year, I think, $400,000 to area food banks. We just gave out another $100,000 to area food banks, and I think we're the only agency that requires the food banks to buy nutritional food for children. But if they want our money, they've got to go buy food that is healthy and not just the surplus food from the federal government that they get from the St. Louis Food Bank. Because we feel it's important that these children get nutritious food, not just food that is non-nutritious. So any support we give the food banks has that caveat to it. They've got to buy nutritious food for the children. We know that professional people don't want us to say this, but there is a direct correlation in our experience between poverty and abuse. I'm sorry to have to say that, because yes, abuse happens at every economic strata and level. We know that. But we see in highly poverty-stricken areas more abuse than you do in other levels of economic security. So we're trying to take care of these children as best we can. And it's been our passion for getting up in the morning. I'll be 78 later this month, and my wife's getting up there. I won't say, but you know, this is what we do for the most part with our lives right now. We've got a few minutes left to take any questions. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to try to answer. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it. I just picked out some different parts of the book, but there are a lot of interesting stories throughout the book. We're not allowed to sell books here at the library, but if you want a book, we've got the books out in the car in the parking lot, and we can get one for you while you're here on the way out. So, but we're not pushing the books. All right. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks everybody for coming. Just a couple library notes while we're all here. So we do have a copy of Mr. Poshard's book here to borrow. If anybody's interested in doing that, you've got dibs, right? Okay, so right at you. But so here's a library tip that a lot of people don't realize. If you have a library card from any library, almost in the state, you can use it right here. And vice versa. If you have a Marion card and you find yourself in their library, you can check out books and then return it here when you come back home. So that's really cool. Most of the Illinois library, I say most because like university libraries don't participate, but pretty much any public library in the state, this is my pocket. I want to let everybody know too about two things. So right down the hallway, when you guys are here, you may want to check out the Peterson room. Just down there, the door's closed right now, but that's our local history collection. There's all kinds of great background information with some of these stories you can go back and research. We also have microfilm of Marion newspapers going back to like 90s, a good long while. And that's available for free. You don't have to have a library card to use that. Those items aren't available to check out and take home, but anybody's welcome to hang out and do research for whatever's interesting. Also on the local beat on November 18th, so about 6 weeks from now, we'll have a local writers fair. This is the second year we're doing this. We'll have several local writers here at the library to do readings and kind of talk about their work and their process of how they do research and come up with stories, talk about publishing and self-publishing and dealing with different types of book formats, ebook versus paper and so on. So November 18th, 10 a.m., watch our website, watch if you're a paper person, watch here in the library. We'll have information about that coming out soon. But save the date. So, several Saturdays from now. November 18th. Nope. November 18th. Yes, sir. It'll be 10 a.m. until noon. On a Saturday morning. But again, thank everybody for coming out. Any questions while we're all still here? Any follow-up? Not? Poshard, again, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So glad to have you. Honored to be here.
Appreciate it.
Come back anytime.
Thank you, Keith.
All right.
Appreciate you guys.
Yeah.
Wonderful library you have here.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Appreciate that.